My aim this evening is to take you on a wee pictorial tour around some familiar, plus less well-visited locations, some antiquities and monuments in Caithness, dipping into the stories and people of past times associated with them. The route and choice of my topics is to a degree influenced by the availability of appropriate images within the collection of photographs I've taken in Caithness over the past few years that are appropriate to the theme. Although I have supplemented these by getting out with a camera over the festive season to fill in some gaps. Hopefully, there'll be something to interest everyone. Our first port of call, if you'll excuse the pun, lies to the west of Thurso. I took this shot of Scrabster back in 2016. The harbour has developed and expanded considerably in recent times, and certainly since its use as a critical part of the supply and troop movement chain to the British naval fleet in Scapa Flow during the First and Second World Wars. The wartime oil supply depot, which you can see here, continues to operate as a successful commercial concern by Hugh Simpson from Wick, and the ever-expanding business park is a critical hub for local firm D. Stephen & Sons. They're all based pretty much most of this area here. From starting out in Wick in 1920 with a single horse and cart, Stevens has grown to become one of Scotland's oldest and most successful road hauliers to date. As local people will know, it's almost impossible to drive on the A9 without seeing a Stevens lorry. What I want to draw your attention to is located on the cliff edge, just about here, on the A9 as it makes its way down into Scrabster. Tucked away discreetly at the end of a cliff-top path running behind Miller Place lies a small memorial stone. My wife and I only discovered this recently when pulled in for a picnic cuppa in the car while enjoying the view of Scrabster. The memorial is engraved in memory of Coachie Henderson and Brian Falconer, and it includes a nautical anchor symbol. There's no date or any further detail on the memorial, and my initial attempts to track down the background to the memorial had limited success, only establishing that Falconer died suddenly, unexpectedly at home in Miller Place on Monday, the 1st of December 2008. He was the son of the late Belle and John Falconer, brother of Francis, Avril and Anne. The funeral service was held at the Scrabster Deep Sea Mission, so when coupled with the anchor symbol, this seemed to confirm some sort of link to the sea. So I contacted my go-to person for all things Thurso, that's Alan McKeever, to see if he could provide any background. And he came up trumps. He advised that Coachie's name was William Henderson and had also lived in Miller Place, where he too died suddenly in 2005, aged 49. Coachie and Brian were friends and neighbours, and they both fished out of Scrabster. The memorial, in fact, was erected by a group of friends in their memory. Moving east along the coast, we come, of course, to Thurso. The esplanade hasn't changed that much since this image on the left was taken by George Washington Wilson in the mid to late 1800s, apart from the obvious addition of the concrete walkway here and this rather ugly concrete building, which started off life as a changing room and is now being used by the canoe club halfway along the esplanade. In fact, for those that read the local papers, this area was reported in today's paper as starting to be seriously undermined by the sea, and it's starting to collapse. One item standing just about here, to the south of the esplanade, between Pentland Crescent and the council houses on Durness Street, is a rather fine memorial fountain dedicated to Dr. John Grant Smith, medical physician to Thurso for 44 years. Its location tucked away here means it's kind of out of the way for anyone walking along the esplanade and enjoying the fine views over Thurso Bay to Holborn Head and the Orkneys beyond. The fountain is resplendent in black and gold, having been restored to its original state by Thurso Community Council, with the painting work done by local painter and decorator Robbie Maitland. According to the excellent Thurso Interactive website, John Smith was born at Lochside in the parish of Falkirk in 1831. Rather than follow his father's occupation into architecture, he decided to study medicine and trained in Edinburgh, winning a number of prizes along the way. He returned to Thurso in 1855, where he opened a practice, and he also acted as parochial medical officer for the village of Halkirk. His lengthy career of 44 years came to an end in April 1898, when, after 2 days of illness, he passed away at the age of 67. Such was the popularity of Dr. Smith that a public funeral was held. The fountain was commissioned under public subscription by the townsfolk and was manufactured by Walter Macfarlane's Saracen Foundry in Glasgow. It was originally erected on a square plinth opposite the town hall, where it stood until the 1950s, where it was taken apart and re-erected at the Esplanade. Here it is here opposite what's now Nickel and Dime, I think. The fountain was somewhat at risk during when the drive for collecting scrap iron was taking place during the Second World War, but thankfully some of the councillors successfully argued that it should remain. In the first of several surprising coincidences that have occurred during preparation of this talk, Alan McKeever told me that it was his father. He was involved in moving the fountain when he was with Thurso Town Council. They wanted it moved because it was in the way of the traffic. The structure actually splits into 3 sections, and a truck was hired from the late Willie Cogle of Dunnett's Garage to transport it to the Esplanade, where it now sits. Further along the coast lies Ulrich Hill, from where superb views of Castletown, Dunnet Bay, Dunnet Head Peninsula, Dunnet and West Side, and the islands. You can see Strome over here and the top of Orkney, at the back end of Orkney mainland over there. In fact, on a decent clear day, most of Caithness can be seen from the summit to the east, south and west. This is looking a little bit further north. Now you see Dunnet Head with Orkney in the background. Go over towards Scrabster. There's Scrabster there, Holborn Head, and the front edge of Burnside and so on. And down here we've got Thurso, the large machine building at the top there, Rocky Campbell's place. And if you look to the south, albeit into the sunshine, you can see Morven and Scarbon and so on. So on a cold winter's day, it really is a nice place to go for a walk. The village of Castletown was established in the 1800s to provide accommodation and services for the workforce of Castle Hill Pavement Works, established by Sheriff Depute James Trail of Ratter to commercially exploit the extraction, finishing and export of Caithness flagstone from the purpose-built Castle Hill Harbour. The iconic wind pump tower here that was used to pump water out of the quarry workings to help power the cutting and finishing machines, and the ruined workers' cottages beyond, are a fitting, if unintentional, memorial to an industry and workforce from the 19th century that gave birth to a thriving and at the time relatively prosperous community. This photo was taken one sunny morning just before New Year as the sun was creeping over the horizon. The early morning and late afternoon can be wonderful for taking photographs. The sand dunes at the back of Dunnet Bay are bounded by sandy ground a fair degree inland, and in times gone by was actually flooded with lochs of its own. Only Loch Helan exists now. But to the east of the bay sits the village of Dunnet, and standing out proud in the late afternoon sunlight is the tower of Dunnet Parish Church. Dunnet Parish Church is deeply historic. There's evidence confirming a church at Dunnet existed as long ago as 1223 and possibly as far back as 700 AD. The graveyard surrounding the church contains graves stretching back to the 15th century. But it's a memorial inside the church that I wish to show you tonight. On the wall, in a small service corridor in the north end of the church, there's a memorial tablet to the man who produced the first detailed maps of Scotland and came to be recognised as a historically and technically significant cartographer. Timothy Pont is thought to have been born in Shiresmill in Fife in about 1565. His father, the Reverend Robert Pont, was a prominent figure in the church at the time and was an associate of John Knox, and became a leading light in the Reformation of 1560. Like his father, Timothy studied at St Andrews University, graduating in 1583, and it seems that he may have learned the art of map making from a law professor there, William Wellwood. In the next 12 years or so, having been made financially secure by his influential father, Timothy set aside his training and future career within the church to embark on a great project, travelling throughout Scotland to map and record the land at a level of detail and accuracy unknown at the time, and writing detailed texts to memorialise his findings. He appears to have completed his mapping activities by the end of the 1500s, as in 1601 he was appointed church minister to the parish of Dunnet. The exact date of his death, however, appears to be unknown, but he possibly died in 1614, the year before his wife is recorded in a document as being a widow. And the tablet is really quite interesting. The centre section here features a book, which at a quick glance from floor level, being a memorial to a minister, might be assumed to be a Bible. However, on closer inspection, the left-hand page here says Map of Scotland at the top and Timothy Pont inscribed at the bottom. On the right-hand side, there's an outline of Caithness and the words Caithness 1608 at the bottom right. In this section here, there's a globe within a frame, which is another kind of link to cartography, and there's another book in the top section. Now, this is one of Pont's maps. This is his map of Caithness. But following his death, the maps and manuscripts passed to his heirs, but were initially rather neglected. Apparently, he'd always intended to publish them, but had been defeated in that quest due to being unable to strike a realistic deal with printers and booksellers. The National Library of Scotland provides a fascinating account of what subsequently happened to the maps that is much too detailed to retell here. So to cut a long story short, John Blauw, the famous Dutch cartographer, used Pont's maps and manuscripts as the major primary source of information for the maps of Scotland in Volume 5 of his Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, Sive Atlas Novus. That was a big atlas of the world, published in Amsterdam in 1654. Blue formally credits 36 of the regional maps of Scotland in this volume to Timothy Pont, of which this is one showing Caithness. Now you'll note west is actually at the top, so north is over here. Much of the importance of the Pont maps rests in the fact that no other collection of source material of comparable size is known to exist for any other of Blauw's atlases. Put simply, Pont's maps are unique and of inestimable importance to the history of cartography. Most of Pont's original maps and manuscripts eventually returned to Scotland and are now held by the National Library of Scotland, where they can be viewed on their website. Sadly, some are missing, including his map of Caithness, but thankfully this survives on this page within the Blauw atlases. So here we are, there's Thurso, Dunnet, and so on. So it's tilted on its side. Moving swiftly back to our tour, the next location is the picturesque hamlet of Ham. And you can see the village of Scarscary, or Scarfscary, for those listening in colour, in the background. If we take a detailed view of Pont's map of Caithness, Ham here, with two M's, is clearly marked. So it must have been a significant holding in the 1590s when Pont did his surveys. And here's Ratter, which of course was, Ham was part of the Ratter estate, which was owned from the 1700s by the Trail family. Now we can see Scrubser, Holborn Head, Thurso, Clarendon, Merkel. There's no Castletown, of course, because it didn't exist at this time, but Stanagill is clearly marked, Dunnet, May, and so on, Gills, Duncansby. By the 1830, the output of flagstone from the Castle Hill works was becoming beyond the capacity of the harbour at Castle Hill to export. So James Trail commissioned James Bremner, who had designed and supervised the construction of the harbour at Castle Hill, to design and build a suitable new harbour at Ham, replacing the superficial pier that previously existed there. Now, this is an old postcard, and you could round about 1905, and you can see the harbour sitting here, the farmhouse and the mill, just as it is today. The reason I've included Ham in this presentation is that when I was a young lad growing up in Thurso in the 16th and 70s, Ham Harbour was a favourite location for our family picnics, where we would explore the rock pools around the harbour and shoreline for shells and similar. I remember the harbour as being rather more substantial and complete compared to what it is today, where little more than a rumble of stones remains. The turbulent waters of the Penton Firth have clearly taken their toll. You can see the basic outline of the harbour as it used to exist. By coincidence, I was in Castle Hill Heritage Centre on Friday last and met Muriel, and she was there preparing for her next exhibition. In conversation, I mentioned about Ham Harbour disappearing before her eyes, and she remembered we had a visitor to the centre about 5 years ago, possibly when we had a regular flagstone exhibition on over the summer, who said that his great-grandfather used to have the job of driving wooden wedges between the stones and the harbour walls at Ham. The wedges would swell up in the seawater, locking the structure together. As soon as they stopped doing that, the structure started to fall apart, hence the state of the harbour today. So there you go, folks. Make sure you keep up your house maintenance. Following the collapse of the Trail Estate in the 1920s, the farm and old mill at Ham was purchased by the father of David Finlayson, whose fascinating boyhood memories of growing up on the farm are captured in a book published by Castletown Heritage Society. The book has proven so popular we've had to print a second run, but we do still have some available if anyone is interested. This tranquil image of the mill and the lathe was taken late afternoon in the middle of November last year. Just a shame about the big pile of bales in the background. At the heart of the nearby parish of Caithness lies Caithness Church of Scotland. This dates back to the early 1600s and is the most northerly church on mainland Britain. Jan de Groot, the Dutchman who founded John O'Groats, is buried in the cemetery, and his tombstone sits in the church building, and it's a popular tourist attraction. However, in modern times, Caithness Church is probably most famous for its royal patronage. The Queen Mother in her time, and now Prince Charles, being regular annual worshippers. Directly inland from the church, and at the crest of the Hill of Wars, is Caithness War Memorial, a smart, well-tended structure. To me, of all the war memorials in Caithness, the Caithness Memorial certainly has one of the best outlooks, with commanding views all round, although from experience, it's a bit exposed during Remembrance Day gatherings. Looking north from the monument, beyond Caithness Church here, one has an unobstructed view of the island of Stroma, described from Norse times as the island in the stream, and this lies within the parish of Caithness. Stroma was inhabited from the 11th century, if not before, and in more contemporary times supported a thriving, self-sufficient community with farms, shops, a post office, 2 harbours and 2 churches. The 1901 census shows that there were 375 people inhabiting the island, which was the highest census count recorded. Sadly, by 1961, the numbers on the island had diminished to just 12. The Manson family, who were the last to live on the island, left shortly thereafter, leaving the island unoccupied apart from the lighthouse keepers, who also left when the lighthouse was automated in 1997. As the numbers fell, the island was put up for sale and was bought in 1960 by James Simpson, who would be born and brought up at Stroma Mains and had left the island in 1943 to become a farmer on the mainland. He populated the abandoned Stroma with stock and returned as necessary to tend them. His son William continues this to this day, staying on the island as required. I was very fortunate to visit Stroma in July 2019 when Thurso Camera Club spent a day there, courtesy of William Simpson. As luck would have it, it wasn't the best of days, being somewhat overcast, and the flat light was not ideal for taking photographs. But at least it remained dry and pleasingly calm, and the sun did put in an appearance an hour or so before we had to leave. This is the Church of Scotland, which stands at pretty much the highest point near the centre of the island, beside the track that runs from north to south. It's now showing signs of decay. Many of the windows are missing or boarded up. The main structure is still fairly sound. Looking back down the track towards the mainland, the gloominess adds a sense of atmosphere to this now abandoned community. A little further along the track stands a rather poignant Stroma War Memorial. I'm indebted to Highland News Media for allowing me to extract and paraphrase the background to the memorial from the excellent Stroma book, edited by Donald Young and published by North Scotland newspapers in 1992. After the end of the Great War, a memorial hall was under construction in memory of those who had lost their lives. The building was almost completed when a severe storm damaged the building and it had to be demolished. The wood was salvaged, sold, and the resulting money put in a bank account. By 1948, the money had accumulated interest, and the decision was taken to fund a memorial plaque commemorating the dead of both World Wars, the surplus money being built up towards provision of a new harbour. The plaque was placed on the inner south wall of the Church of Scotland and unveiled at a well-attended ceremony in April 48, and there it remained until 1970, when James Simpson was concerned for its safety. Discussions were held about relocating the plaque to Caithness Church on the mainland, but this proved not possible due to Church of Scotland policies that were in place at the time. James Simpson then had discussions with Pat Simpson and other ex-Stroma people about the possibility of erecting a memorial structure incorporating the plaque on Stroma. In due course, 8 volunteers set about its construction on the foundations of the old Memorial Hall. The stones from the base came mainly from part of the old school building, and the surmounting structure, this part here, came from bulls collected from the foreshore. The concrete cross was made by Pat Simpson and given a rough Harald finish. The finished memorial was unveiled at an impressive ceremony organised by Caithness British Legion on the 17th of July 1975, and apparently 175 people were ferried to the island by 5 boats. The service was conducted by the Reverend William Dungavel from Castletown, and the memorial dedicated by Reverend William MacDonald of Caithness. After wreaths were laid, the Pibroch Lament was played by David Stephen from Corsbach, concluding a fine tribute to the 12 men of Stroma who had given their young lives in the service of their country. Now, the other place on Stroma I wanted to show you was Stroma Cemetery, which is located on a promontory called Scarton Point at the southeast corner of the island. It's completely dominated by the Kennedy Mausoleum. As you can see, the sun had come out by that stage, and it was really a rather nice afternoon. And that's Duncan's Bay Head you can see there in the background. The graveyard surrounds the rectangular stone-built mausoleum, which is about 7.5 by 5.5 meters in plan. And it actually has a dugcot on the top level, and there's an access for the birds at the back. The roof, however, is long gone, and it's believed to have been erected in 1677 by the Kennedy family, and the date is apparently carved on the lintel above the entrance door. But when I was there, I couldn't make it out at all. In researching the mausoleum, I came across a fascinating story in Wikipedia, in that one curious side effect of the constant spray of seawater across the island was that it mummified some of the corpses housed in the mausoleum. The corpses became something of a tourist attraction, and in the 18th century, became something of a tourist attraction in the 18th century, as their limbs and body became very light and flexible. However, their popularity proved their undoing. In 1762, Bishop of Ross and Caithness Robert Forbes recorded in his journal that Murdoch Kennedy played such wretched tricks on the body of his father for the diversion of strangers as in time broke it to pieces, and the head was the part that fell first off. He used to place strangers at his father's feet, and by setting a foot on one of his father's, he made the body spring up speedily and salute them, which surprised them greatly. Then, after laying the body down again, he beat a march upon the belly, which sounded equally loud with the drum. What a pleasant fellow that fellow was. By 1786, the mummies had been destroyed by cattle and careless visitors, as, according to Walker's Hibernian magazine, curiosity to see the mummies had brought many idle people to Stroma, and that some out of wantonness had shuttered the door, and others the bodies, and the door not being repaired, sheep and cattle entered the vault and trampled them to pieces. Well, certainly when I was there, there's no trace now of any original burials or mummies in the vault. According to the Stroma book, there are about 251 burial layers within the cemetery grounds, which is very shallow in places, such that frequently only single graves could be dug. If you want to know more about the burials in the graveyard, Caithness Family History Society has recently published a book describing all the monumental inscriptions. The view from the cemetery over to the mainland, however, is quite impressive. So here we've got Hoona, John O'Groats, and of course, Duncan's Bay Head. Complete change of scene now. One morning, a couple of days before New Year, I was heading over to Watton to take some photographs of our next location. As I came over the hill at North Watton, I had to get out the car several times just to capture the scenes before me. It was, to put it mildly, a stunning frosty morning, with mist hanging about in the low ground and various wind farm turbines poking their heads above the mist. Moments like these just don't last long. You've got to grab them when you can. By the time I'd reached Watton Cemetery, which was only a mile and a half further on, the mist had started to clear. Right time, right place. Very lucky. The hall in Watton is a well-used community facility in the village. To the left is the War Memorial, but it's this item over here on the right that I want to draw your attention to. This is a memorial to, This is a memorial to Alexander Bain, and the inscription on the memorial reads, erected 1943 by public subscription in honour of the distinguished Caithness man, Alexander Bain, inventor of the electric clock and the electric printing telegraph. Born at Leanmore, parish of Watton, 1810, and died in Kirkintilloch, 1877. And the memorial says he thought above himself and so helped to raise a great new world industry. Now, whilst at the time of erecting the monument, they must have thought he was born at Leanmore, Bain was in fact born at Hoostray of Dun, which I'll mention more about shortly. Bain is one of my engineering heroes and deserved far more acclaim for his achievements than he received, not least due to Bain's claims to be the inventor of the electric clock being allegedly stolen by the very influential Professor Wheatstone, leading to a bitter patent feud between the two, although Bain was eventually vindicated. Examples of Bain's clocks are exhibited in museums in London, Oxford, Glasgow and Edinburgh, and indeed within the committee room in Watton Hall. And here is his clock on the right-hand side. So if you actually see the swinging pendulum and the motion here with the coil, that's what's replicated on the bottom of the monument. And up at the top here, there's an electric spark, which is supposed to signify the electric printing telegraph. Our next location is the Chapel of Dun and the surrounding graveyard, which Liz and I visited in October 2020, shortly after the overgrown grass and weeds had been cleared away thanks to the efforts of Councillor William Mackay and his wife Glynis. Councillor Mackay is, of course, better known as the ubiquitous AI Willie. The chapel is said to be the burial place of the Sinklers of Dun, and it's a scheduled monument. It's also known locally as the Tomb of Dun, as is a burial vault located beneath the chapel structure, which it is thought has its origins in medieval times. Now, the Tomb of Dun is located near Old Hall, which is here, and about 2.5 miles from Wotton. There's no track or access road to the tomb. To access the chapel, one has to walk across gated fields from a small parking space beside a private house. The site sits within the area known as Dun, hence the name. So there's Dun, and there's Hoostry of Dun, where Bain was supposed to be born. And there's the Tomb of Dun in the middle, just opposite Loch Wotton. I'm grateful to www.ancientmonumentsuk for the following technical information. The post-medieval rectangular chapel was constructed from Caithness flagstone and is approximately 11.3 metres long on an east-west alignment by 7.5 metres wide. The 4-metre-high walls are about 1 metre thick, and as you can see, they're extensively clad with invasive ivy, which is gradually contributing to the erosion of the structure. The roof is long gone. There's 2 entrances, one in the east and one in the west, and there are 2 windows in the south wall. While we were there, we bumped into a couple of old friends, Jim Campbell and his wife Kathleen from Oldkirk. And here they all are standing in front of the east entrance. The tomb itself is beneath the west half of the chapel and is believed to predate the chapel structure. As one approaches from the east side, there's a set of steps here leading down into the vault, which has a barrel roof. The vault space is still intact and is apparently empty. However, we didn't venture down the steps to find out. The burial ground surrounding the chapel apparently contains over 50 graves, some dating back at least as far as 1742. As we all know, headstones are a useful and interesting source of genealogical and social history information, and these 2 examples are no exception. Part of this flat one on the left here says, I think it says, this stone was erected here by George Lethwright Dun, who in memory of his spouse Elizabeth Campbell, who died May 28, 1742. Their son David died in nonage. I think nonage is an old legal term meaning under the age of 21, so he was below the legal age of responsibility at that time. And there's their initials either side of what looks like, well, I think it is an upside down Masonic symbol. So there's something curious going on here. Maybe it's some kind of allied Freemason organization. The one on the right, it just tells a tragic story like so many stones do. Donald Henderson Taylor, who was accidentally killed at Todd Hole's 9th of July 1917, aged 70. And his beloved wife, Jessie Gunn Henderson, died 23rd May 1894. And also their son, Donald, Private, 1st Seaforths, who died in Mesopotamia, 22nd of February 1916, aged 31. So poor Donald saw both his wife and his son die in his time. Moving back through Wotton to the village of Hasta, if you're standing on the Tannock Road looking down to the junction with the A882 down here, you're presented with a scene of typical village infrastructure. Bus shelters, old and new, streetlights, houses, garden sheds, Christmas decorations, parked cars. On the left, tucked away along the line of the dry stone wall, is a memorial that's probably off the beaten track for many. This memorial well was erected by the tenantry of Sturcook Estate in memory of the late Henry Sinclair Horne, better known as General Lord Horne of Sturcook, who died on the 14th of August 1929. He was a military officer in the British Army, most notably for his leadership during the First World War, and was the only British artillery officer to command an army during the war. According to a report in the John O'Groats Journal of April 2020, Horne was instrumental in the British Army's use of a military tactic known as creeping barrage on the Western Front, which helped end the war much sooner than might have been the case. And he's also remembered for helping save many thousands of lives by organising the evacuation of troops from the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1915 November. Described as a masterpiece of planning, ingenuity and deception by historian John Terraine. And this is the memorial there to Henry Sinclair. He died suddenly while out shooting on the moor, apparently for natural causes or certainly unexplained causes. When the memorial was originally built, it stood on its own at the edge of the grounds of Sturcock House, the home of the Horne family. This view of the memorial dates from 1930, when it appeared in the John O'Groats Journal Christmas number, December 25, 1930, and reproduced in the Times Gone By compilation Volume 1 in 1991. I'm grateful to Highland News Media for granting permission to reproduce it here. Since that time, Haster Village has developed and the houses of appropriately named Fountain Square back on to the dyke behind the memorial. Little remains of Sturcock House, which was destroyed by fire in 1994. Now, while we're in Haster, I'm going to digress slightly, if I may, into another one of the coincidences that I mentioned earlier. Just before Christmas, Nick Lindsay, a friend of mine and chairman of Clyne Heritage Society in Brora, emailed me copies of a report in the Northern Times he had come across whilst doing some research into a local heritage project. The report concerned a horseshoe making and horseshoeing competition that had taken place in Brora in September 1927. The pretext for his email was that from the 18 competitors, all the prize winners were from Castletown or other locations within Caithness. When one zooms into the relevant sections of the report, you can see he was quite right. The overall winner was Mr. John Nicholson from Castletown, who had won the Challenge Cup and the gold medal for horseshoeing for the second year running. I think I'm right in saying that Mr. Nicholson is a forebear of John Nicholson, who I think is on the call tonight, and who is a past membership secretary of the Caithness Family History Society. The other winners in the shoemaking and horseshoeing competitions were W.S. Campbell from Merkel, there's John Nicholson from Castletown, R. Mackay from Dunbeath, William Sutherland Sr. from Haster, and R. Sutherland from Wick, and commended W.B. Sutherland Jr. from Haster, and A. Alexander from Bower. And for the horseshoeing, it was John Nicholson from Castletown, A. Alexander Bower, W.B. Sutherland Jr. Haster, W.S. Campbell Merkel, R. Mackay Dunbeath, and A. Alexander Bower. So he's quite right. Now, I'd like to note that the W.B. Sutherland of Haster won 4th prize in the shoemaking, and W.B. Sutherland Jr. from Haster won 3rd prize in the horseshoeing competition. Haster Smithy still exists today, and I took the opportunity when photographing the Horne Memorial well to call into the smithy to have a word with the current owners. The smithy is currently run by A.W.B. Sutherland, who confirmed that his father and grandfather would have been those featured in the competition. Not only that, but he mentioned in passing that Jaden Alexander, the current journal editor of Caithness Family History Society, was his nephew. How about that for some coincidences? And there's more. Whilst browsing through the Times Gone By Volume 1, my wife Liz spotted an item in the December 1933 edition of the John O'Groats Journal Christmas number. The item carried 2 photographs of retired citizens, one of which on the left has the caption, Mr. Robertson Sutherland, the veteran retired blacksmith of Haster near Wick. Mr. Sutherland in his day was one of the most able horseshoers and plough trimmers in the north, and won many high awards in numerous competitions. Another coincidence, but it doesn't stop there. If you look at the sponsors of two of the prizes in the broader competition, this one here and this one here, you will note they were donated by the Mustad Horsenail Company Limited. This rang a bell with me, as Liz has a Mustad gold medal that was awarded to her maternal grandfather. And this is the medal, which is engraved on the rear: Caithness Agricultural Society, Horseshoeing Competition, 1st of August 1923, won by D. Mackay, first prize, junior class. Her grandfather, Donald Mackay, was a blacksmith in East May from around the end of the First World War. He died in 1966, at which time the smithy ceased operation, but her family still own the croft of the smithy. All this sparked by a chance email from a friend. And so to the east coast now, to Berrydale, at the edge of our county and home to the notorious Berrydale Braes. This image was taken in July 2020, when the much vaunted works to realign the North Hairpin Bend were well underway. Our point of interest sits on the nose of windswept land some 20 metres above the northern approach to the hairpin. The A9, of course, going around the back. Whilst it's clearly visible from the South Brae, Berrydale Old Burial Ground is pretty much out of sight of drivers passing by either on the old or the new route. The main clue to the existence of the cemetery from the old route was a set of concrete steps leading up the face of the hill, opposite a small lay-by on the other side of the A9. It's a stiff climb up to the gate to access the cemetery, but this access is no longer readily available now that the road has been diverted. A new access has been created at the top of the hill from the A9 on the other side, which may encourage more visitors. I haven't been down the road yet to see if there's a wee car park, but I suspect there may be. Either way, the cemetery offers good views out along the northeast coast of Caithness or across to the South Brae, and it's certainly well worth a visit. Out of curiosity, I consulted the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website about the single war grave. The grave belongs to Corporal Angus Henderson, 1st Battalion Home Guard. He died 18th of August 1944, aged 35. He was the son of Donald and Jane Henderson of Dunbeath and husband of Margaret Gunn Henderson of Dunbeath. And the 1st Battalion Home Guard had their headquarters in Wick and was affiliated to the 4th, 5th, Sutherland and Caithness Battalion of the Seaforth Highlanders, whose camp badge they wore. I wonder if 35-year-old Corporal Henderson held a reserved occupation. I haven't found any record yet of what Home Guard action led to his death, but perhaps somebody out there knows. Whilst reading the other information on the record page, I noted that there was an entry for a war grave at the Dun Old Chapel Yard in Watton. Another coincidence. This was Sergeant Pilot Ian Sinclair Sutherland, RAF Volunteer Reserve, 30 November 1943. I hadn't noticed a war grave at the cemetery at Dun, so looked back through my photographs from the graveyard. And lo and behold, there it is, slap bang in the middle. The Caithness and the War 1939-45 book, written by Norman Glass and published by North of Scotland newspapers in '94, provides more details about Pilot Sergeant Ian Sinclair. He was a banker in Thurso and Kirkwall and was killed in a flying accident. He was married and was the eldest son of John A.M. Sutherland, a teacher at Lanargill School, and Mrs. Sutherland of Harpsdale Schoolhouse, Falkirk. Another coincidence. We're drawing near to the end of my talk, but I felt I had to include this one, and not just because Liz suggested it. Mounted in the Caithness General Hospital boundary wall in Station Road in Wick, about 50 metres up from the mini roundabout, is an interesting commemorative tablet, which is easily missed as it blends into the stone wall. Clearly, the civic fathers of Wick were extremely proud to have had these distinguished visitors to the town, several of whom were granted the Free Burgess of Wick. The names are not listed in date order, but in perceived order of seniority, starting with royalty and working down through parliamentary figures and notable people of the day. Some very interesting names here: Edward VII, Gladstone, Lloyd George, and Lord Jellicoe, to name but a few. In what I'm calling the celebrity group at the bottom, we have author Robert Louis Stevenson, philanthropist Andrew Carnegie, and legendary Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton, who, coincidentally, died exactly 100 years ago last Wednesday. If you want to know more about the tablet, I would point you to the excellent Wick Heritage Trail video by the Wick Society, which is available on YouTube. Our final stop is at the end of the road, quite literally. The area around John O'Groats has seen something of a long overdue revival in recent years. Recently opened John O'Groats Brewery visitor experience looks resplendent, and John O'Groats Trail is proving extremely popular, as is the beer. The area now looks very welcoming to visitors, at least on a nice sunny May day like this. But what I want to draw your attention to is over here, under construction. It's a recently constructed memorial to the brave souls taken by the ferocious seas of the Pentland Firth. I think it may be the newest public memorial in Caithness, though someone will probably correct me on that. There are currently 2 plaques. One is to the memory of the George Rob, a fishing vessel working out of Aberdeen that ran aground near the Stacks of Duncansby on the 6th of September 1959. All her crew were lost, as was one Coast Guard officer who collapsed and died during the rescue attempt. The other is to the motor vessel Semfjord, a much more recent tragedy when the fully laden Cyprus-registered cement carrier capsized in extremely violent sea conditions in the Pentland Firth on the 2nd of January 2015. The rapid nature of the capsize denied the crew an opportunity to issue a distress message or the chance to conduct a controlled abandonment of the vessel, with the result that all 8 crew were lost. There's space for another 11 plaques. Let us hope these are never filled with new disasters. Thank you for listening.